Hey loves, my name is Amber, welcome to my channel, and today we're going to be discussing The Woman in the Dark by Vanessa Savage. Before we get too far into this review, I did want to mention a few potential trigger warnings that are relevant to the text, including death, murder, drinking, overdose, mental health struggles, emotional abuse, aggression, physical assault and abuse, self-harm, homophobia, and rape. So if any of these things are liable to be incredibly bothersome or triggering for you, please have extreme discretion while watching the rest of this review or reading the book. The book follows Sarah, her two teenage children, Mia and Joe, and her husband Patrick as they move into Patrick's childhood home. An idea that sounds all well and good on paper, except that between the time Patrick's family lost the house and now, a family had been brutally murdered within the walls, and the house is now only referred to as the murder house. Patrick desperately wants to give this house a new name and a fresh start for the family, especially following some of Sarah's mental health struggles after her mother's death. However, nobody in the family is comfortable with this move, especially after they move in and a series of increasingly weird occurrences surround the house, including the house being watched by a mysterious stranger and different gifts and items showing up in and around the house that shouldn't have been. Not only has the house made everybody uncomfortable, but Patrick's growing aggression and anger towards both Sarah and the children has left everybody miserable. But is it the house, is it Patrick, or is it all in Sarah's head? Sarah wants to think it's the latter, but after the incidents continue to escalate, she finally comes to the conclusion that she should just take the kids and run. The only problem with that is that Joe isn't actually biologically hers. So the real question is, will they be able to get out in time before the murder house strikes again? Alright, so this book, I have so many feelings about. I went into it so excited because I was so curious to see where the plot was going to go. And well, the book, I'm going to say it right outright. Like, the book definitely isn't bad at all. I was definitely just a little bit disappointed by a variety of things. I'll be honest, I was definitely wanting it to be more of a direct horror. Not that the things in the book aren't horrific, and not that it's not even considered to be a horror novel. I definitely would categorize it as that, but I wanted it to be more like of a traditional, like, supernatural horror. Like, I wanted there to be more of a I wanted there to be more of a paranormal element than we ended up getting. Well, there definitely is something there. We don't get really any full explanations of it, and we really don't go as in-depth into it as I would have liked to have seen. It's definitely a lot more psychological than I was expecting, and not psychological in the way that, like, is necessarily fun. It was a little bit hard to read. Not because it was poorly written. If anything, it was the latter. It was really, really well written, and you were able to visualize things perfectly, but that definitely led to a lot of feelings of anxiety and, quite frankly, a bit of nausea while reading, because some of the different abusive elements were so well explained that you could definitely feel the discomfort while reading. And it got to a point where, like, I didn't really want to binge read it. I definitely did, and, like, it was fine, but it was just so uncomfortable and so real, and just a little bit too real to things that I've experienced and seen firsthand in my life for it to have been as fun as, like, I personally would have found it had it been a little bit more paranormal based, you know? It was definitely just a lot of emotional and psychological abuse from the husband.
So that glitch we just experienced, I don't know what that was. I sent it to a video editor friend of mine. She doesn't know what that was. My camera has never done that before or since filming this video, so I don't know what to tell you. Is it paranormal? I don't know about that one, but the insane coincidence of that happening immediately following me saying I wish the book was more paranormal and supernatural based than psychological abuse is icky.
And it also would have been a little bit of a different narrative had, I feel like, the husband hadn't been a little bit off from the start. Like, It would have been, I think it would have been a little bit more fun to have seen the husband being like completely fantastic to begin with, and then the slow descent into the asshole, and then having to wonder, like, is it him? Is he going bad? Is the house affecting him? You know, we don't know. But what we got was him being kind of a dick from the beginning, and definitely very, very manipulative and coercive, to the point where, like, from the beginning, I was just like, fuck this guy, I don't like you. Whereas I think it could have been more effective had you had a little bit more feelings of affection towards him and been like, oh, he's a good dad, like, this is a cute couple. And then we have this horrifying downward descent. But from the beginning, he's kind of just a dick. So it's like, well, fucking I hope you die. Like, I have no sympathy there. So if I'm being honest, I feel like all of the characterizations were a little bit stereotypical. Oh man, it was so bad. Because definitely for like the first half of reading the book, I kept talking to people about it, and I was like, I honestly can't tell if this, like, some of the behaviors within their family dynamic, and especially coming from the husband, I was like, I can't tell if this is meant to be some of the more horror aspects of the book, or if this is just what straight people are like. You know, because, like, there's definitely a lot of stereotypes, especially in media, of how, like, cishet relationships are, and a lot of them are very, very toxic, especially within older generations. So I was just like, I can't tell if this is just trying to depict, like, a stereotypical, like, marriage dynamic, or if this is trying to show that, like, he's an asshole. And then obviously it becomes much more clear throughout the book as he progressively gets worse and worse. But for the first good half of the book, I'm like, are straight people just like this? Because some of them are. But I couldn't tell if that was what the book was trying to convey. So, you know, the teenagers did also feel a little bit stereotypical. Like, I wish that we could have gotten them a little bit more fleshed out as characters, and in particular their relationships with their parents, and especially with, like, Sarah the mother. But that also does play into the like plot of the book about how distant she's been, and like there are different events that like cause her to be so, and different influences, and like there's a whole thing. I don't want to get too far into it because I don't want to give a lot of spoilers for the book, but like it definitely makes sense that there's a lot of distance between the relationship. But I do think it would have been more impactful had we gotten a little bit of a taste of their closeness before that distance occurred, so that way, like, as the book progressed, we had a little bit more of an idea of like how different things are than when they had been before, and you know what we want to get back to, versus it kind of just being like, well, this is the only relationship between them we've seen, so like, you know. One element that I did really, really like and respect about the inclusion of different elements within the storyline was the fact that of the children, like, Joe wasn't biologically Sarah's child. He was biologically Patrick's child, but Sarah came into his life literally like after a few months, like he was still a newborn essentially. And so Sarah was kind of adopted into their family and became his surrogate mother. So much so to the point that they just raised him knowing that Sarah was the mother, and they never mentioned that she wasn't biologically his mother, that there was an actual mother who had died. So, and they hadn't yet gotten to telling Joe that. So there adds so much complexity to the idea of Sarah staying in this relationship and in this house, because there are so many people who are telling her, like, just get out, you know, take the kids and run. And she's like, okay, but I can't take my son, you know, without legally it coming back on me. Like, I would not win in a custody battle because he is not biologically my kid. And I, like, never legally officially adopted him because reasons, the husband, piece of shit, whatever. So she stays for a lot longer than she should have because she doesn't want to lose her kid. And I think that that's probably one of the most respectable ways to present this topic, because like obviously when there are different abusive situations, like there are so many reasons that people stay, and it's not anybody's place to judge them except themselves. You know, entirely personal. Sometimes you don't realize it until it's a little bit too late. Sometimes you don't want to admit that that's what's actually going on. You know, there's so many different elements that get thrown into that, but some people are just so judgmental about it that I feel like if you're going to depict it in a book, this was a really, really good way to do that, because it's not like you can just be like, oh, she's stupid, which nobody who stays in an abusive relationship is stupid. There's so many complexities to that. We're not going to fully get into a therapy session here, but it's nobody's place to judge anybody, you know. But I feel like because people are so judgmental and because they will judge, especially if it is a piece of fiction, I feel like this was a really, really good way to do that and be like, this is a good reason for her to have not run sooner, you know, because she truly and so deeply, like, this is her son, whether it's biological or not, this is her fucking kid. She's not going to leave either of her children behind. So I think that that was a really, really good way to present the topic without getting a lot of criticism from like hateful and judgmental readers. And it also just adds so much emotional complexity to the story that I thought that that was definitely a benefit. If I'm being honest, I do think I was a bit disappointed by how exactly the end of the book played out. There were definitely a few things that were unnecessary and felt a little bit exaggerated. Like, the whole book felt very, very realistic until the end, and then some elements just felt a little bit too exaggerated to where it took your sense of believability a step back, and it was kind of just like, oh, right, we're reading a book, you know, this isn't real. Just in how certain characters did certain things and how it exactly played out. I wasn't necessarily disappointed by the ending, but I also wasn't entirely satisfied. But I also don't know what exactly could have changed for it to have been a little bit more satisfying either. I think it's just the nature of the book and the storyline that, like, it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be 100% a happy ending, obviously. They could have gone a little darker, if I'm being honest. Like, it was definitely a little bit more happy of an ending than I was expecting it to be, especially because I did happen to get the book from the Down the Rabbit Hole book box subscription, which specifically focuses on like dark reads that don't have happy endings. So I was expecting this to go way off the deep end, and it didn't. It was like surprisingly a happy ending for most of the characters. So, like, I could have stood to have seen a little bit more death, a little bit more destruction. But, you know, it wrapped it up. It tied up the loose ends pretty much. And it was definitely, like, a very self-contained story. They do leave a lot of open ends about a lot of the backstory of the house specifically. But we do get most of our questions answered when it comes to the backstories of featured characters. So, you know, it's really based on personal preference. Overall, it's definitely like a decent read. I don't know who exactly would benefit the most from reading it though, because like, obviously, like, I could be like, oh, it'll be fun for horror fans, and it may be for some horror fans depending on your particular brand of horror. I'm definitely more of a slasher and like cheesy bitch myself, and I just feel it like the characters' downward spirals and abusive descents were so well written, and I say well written because it's very, very accurately depicted. Obviously, like, what's going on is very horrible, but it's accurate. It was so well written that I was genuinely like nauseous and then had like a little bit of loss of breath from anxiety while reading because I could feel it. So if you're somebody who enjoys going through different emotions and feeling very intense emotions while reading, this would definitely be a good one for you. But I would also hesitate to recommend it to anybody who could really relate very hard to the story, because it could be very, very painful to revisit some of these emotions. But I would definitely read it again in a few years, you know, out of curiosity to see if I enjoyed it on a second reading or if I caught more foreshadowing or things like that. Because, you know, I think it's always fun to read a book at least twice just to see how things are set up that you missed, obviously, because you weren't looking for them the first time around. But anyways, thank you guys so much for watching. I had a blast hanging out with y'all. Peace.